What's up, everyone? I'm Miller Prism Sword, and I'm back with another week of Deck Dives, a series where I take a look at interesting lineups and decks that players are bringing to the Champion Draft Series. In previous weeks, I talked about strategies I think players are trying to employ to help them find success in this limited draft format that is the Champion Draft Series. I talked about stuff like adapting your lineup to what players have historically brought. I talked about bringing interesting things and lineups that players wouldn't expect from your own pool that you've been able to draft. But this week, I want to talk about the strategy of just playing good decks. Uh, I picked Los Chalangas' Slay this week, partly because the decks that he brought near and dear to my heart, a little bit of a personal bias, but also because I thought there were some interesting choices that were made in the deck building process that I wanted to highlight why I think they were made and why I think they found success this week. Anyways, here are the lists. For the first list, we have Seraphine Vandal City. Normally, what you'd expect from this deck, which has been very popular on ladder and in tournaments for this past week of the Eternal season, is you'd see stuff like Janna and Ezreal being paired alongside the Seraphine as potential win conditions or hand fixing, etc., etc. But because of how Champion Draft Series works, you can't always draft that Ezreal, you can't always draft that Janna, and also to access Bandle City, you do need to have at least a Bandle City champion in that slot. So this is what Nora fulfills, and I think she actually does a very fantastic job. Normally, within Seraphine lists, you'd expect stuff like Ezreal and Eternal to have a potential win condition with level 2 ability paired up with Seraphine. Maybe you'd see something like a Big Cat as another way to add another ability for your opponent. And sometimes if you like go into the Ionia version, which is like another topic for another day, you'd see stuff like Set as a way to control the board early and also like as a showstopper finisher potentially. But if you scroll through the list, because we have to scroll down because of how Seraphine lists normally are, we actually don't see any of that. We don't see a Big Cat there, and we don't have the Ezreal drafted, so we can't play Ezreal. But I think the reason why this deck still finds success is because if you look at his opponent this week, you would see stuff like Poppy Lulu, you see Jax, Sana, and a lot of those are aggressive decks that try and just win early, and if you manage to survive their onslaught throughout the mid game, then usually you can get enough value out of a level 2 Seraphine by herself, or Sunken Temple being on the board for long enough, or Back Alley Bar discounting enough cards. And I think servicing your entire deck to surviving the early game is pretty key. And I think that's something that Seraphine decks naturally can do, but also I think Nora is a very fantastic card at helping control the board early. Because if she comes down on turn 2 and she isn't answered, she's going to start generating a ton of free portals, and then those will be chump blockers or even high rolls to contest the board even by herself. And this is why I think this Seraphine list was able to just get a win without too much trouble against the Poppy Lulu this week. And the other list I want to talk about was Slay's Kanetrox, another deck I personally enjoy a lot. It hasn't been as good in the wider Eternal format in ladder, where there's like a lot more stuff to play around and a lot more crazier high power decks. But in the Champion Draft Series, where things are toned down a little bit on the power level sometimes, depending on how rosters are formed, I think Kanetrox is a very big boon for Slay to have. In this regard, usually Kanetrox is pretty good at being able to match like 1-for-1 mid-range decks by being able to accrue enough value by recurring equipment, or if your health gets low enough, you can sustain with Aatrox striking or Ross killing units. And I think the weakness of like the opponent going like much wider than you and then like getting taller with a board with stuff like champion strength and stuff like that not being a thing here in this opposing weak lineup of Poppy Lulu. Usually if you're going 1-for-1, then you're pretty happy with that, because eventually like you're gonna have more units and then they can potentially transform into Darken, etc., etc. Or Aatrox and Rost are like tall enough threats on their own right where you can't really get around them because they're constantly regenerating health. And this is why I think Slay was able to find success this week. Now I know Slay hasn't had the greatest of seasons so far. This week was his first win. However, despite how the season has already played out for the first 4 weeks, we still have 5 more weeks to go, and I would like to see players that haven't had the strongest seasons still make a comeback. I think anything can happen in such a long series like this, where there's 9 weeks of regular season and then we have playoffs. So that's going to be it for me for Deck Dives this week. I will see you all next time, but until then, hope you have a good time.